All right, fellas, welcome back again to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. Our YouTube channel is dedicated to all things Bannerlord related, and especially advanced battlefield command and tactics, but the precursor and the foreplay to battlefield command and tactics is unquestionably kingdom management and logistics, right? Basically, your campaign strategy, arming your companions, putting them in a position to win battles, making sure your cities are producing enough food to feed the troops, enough money to pay for everything. These are critical elements of Bannerlord, and it can be a little bit dizzying with all the different policies you can choose, all the different decisions you have to make. I'm aware that some fellas are overwhelmed by this. Some guys may not care that much, but for us sort of thinking strategists, this is one of the more interesting parts of Bannerlord. And in today's episode, we will cover a lot of these different things at the beginning here. Probably the first 20 minutes or so will be dedicated to this side of the game. So go ahead and strap yourself in. This should be a nice mellow start to the episode, and let's get going. All right, so we've loaded up the game here, and we're going to talk about several subjects. I will try to keep this somewhat coherent without it being too long of just a rambling spree here. We will try to be comprehensive in what we cover in this episode. Of course, we've covered some of this stuff in the other episodes, but now that we have a fully fledged kingdom here with several cities, several castles, a bunch of territory, and the start of some player clans, or some kingdom clans, if you want to call them that, I want to talk about more of these elements of the game in greater detail. At this stage of the game, you really are more involved in this process than ever before in this campaign. You've got to decide when to make new clans. You've got to decide how many clans. You've got to decide how you want to manage their armies, etc., etc. All right, so first in this episode, anytime that you have strategy in mind, you must understand the situation, right? Information is one of the most important things, frankly, in life, right? You can't make good decisions unless you have information to make those decisions correctly, right? If your friends tell you you're going on a road trip and they don't tell you you're going to the Arctic and you bring your shorts and your fucking flip-flops, you're the only dipshit fucking shivering in the corner. So that information in life and in Bannerlord is essential for success, right? So our map here, we're looking pretty damn good at this stage of the campaign. I would say this campaign is getting close to the tipping point. Now, Valandia is still this absolutely monstrous juggernaut. It's kind of obscene. Every time I look, they've taken another castle or another couple cities. Every once in a while, they get pushed back by other kingdoms, but they're still monstrously overpowered compared to everybody else. The Britannians are barely holding on here. The Western Empire is barely holding on here, and that's because these kingdoms are sandwiched, right? They're at war with us, or Sturgia, and Valandia, right? And occasionally they have peace, but that's mostly them just begging to not be exterminated. Of course, we've dealt the Sturgeons a savage blow. They're up here suffering a little bit. They're still a threat, but they're definitely they're recoiled a bit. They're definitely staggered at the back of the boxing ring, so to speak. And then there's the Southern Empire down here, still a major threat. And ironically, we've kind of switched places, right? We're in a lot of the territories that the Southern Empire starts with at the beginning of the game, and they're in all the Aserai territories. A very sort of ironic twist to how the campaign has gone. So we have our army here, we have a map, we have an understanding of what the game looks like. Now we need to talk about the cities and the diplomatic situation. Right? The diplomatic situation is important, and we'll cover this in 30 seconds. War right now with the Southern Empire, Valandia, and the Western Empire. The Western Empire, like I said, is our primary threat because Valandia is a whole kingdom away. The Southern Empire is a threat, and we're going to start to deal with them as well, but they have been busy on the other side of the map, right? They're fighting Valandia, and they have been fighting the Aserai, right? I think right now, in fact, they have peace with the Aserai, but are still at war with Valandia. Yeah, so this is an important thing to look at occasionally for strategy, right? This means that they're at least a little bit occupied. There's a good chance that some of their armies here are heading over here, right, to the other side of the map. That obviously is important information for us when we're considering strategy. If they were only at war with us, we would proceed differently in the next episode or two than we would as right now, right? Since we know that they have a threat over here from this Valandian power, that changes how we're going to approach things. Now, city-wise, I'm going to talk extensively about cities in this episode because cities are vital, and it has to do a lot with campaign strategy. One of the most basic things that some players sort of misunderstand is that you want to be filling out your garrisons for cities, but you don't want to be spending all your resources, right? Money is the key to all war. That has been the case for thousands of years, right? You must have enough money to operate your kingdom and not have shortfalls. Well, at this stage, we're highly successful in this regard. You can see our settlement income there. That's from all the different cities. It is enormously larger than our outcome, right? The expenses. A big part of the reason for that is that much of this territory is territory we took recently from the Sturgeons. And as a consequence, we have the revenue for many of these castles and cities without the garrisons. Here, Tayal's a perfect example. And we're going to get into cities a lot more on a minutia level. This might actually be 30 or 35 minutes, depending on how fast I talk and how much I cover the same thing over. But you can see Tayal here, for example, is enormously prosperous, right? 8,000. I always like to think of the population of a city as 10 times that number. So there's 81,000 people living in this beautiful sturgeon town of Tayal, and they have a small garrison, 189 troops. And again, I do 10x for that sort of role playing. So there's a garrison of 1,800 there in Tayal. Now there's two different ways on these two screens where you can look at your fiefs. I prefer your clan page. On your clan page, when you go to fiefs, you just get a lot more data here, right? It's more accessible. You can break some of this stuff down, like you can hold your mouse over it and it'll tell you exactly what's going on. So let's just look at Tayal here for 30 seconds before we continue on sort of with strategy and the talk at that side of things. All right, so Tayal here, like I said, it's highly prosperous, although notice this, right? Food shortage, minus 25. It's becoming less and less prosperous because these citizens don't have enough food. To go down to food stocks, right? Minus 50, and they're already at 0. Now, a city will start to starve, and the garrison will start to have issues. In other words, eventually, if this city is sieged, it will have garrison issues. And what happens is basically on a day-to-day basis, more and more troops hit the sick bed, right? They hit the medieval sick room because they don't have enough food and they become unable to fight in battle. So right now the garrison says 189, no expected change. However, this is going to change if they get attacked, right? If Tayal is sieged, they're going to go even further into the negative, and more than 3 days of negative in the food, and your garrison starts to starve, right? However, the militia does not starve. I guess they've got little hiding places where they've got food stored around, and the militia will fight even if the garrison is starved to 0. Now, this is not too big of a concern. Why? Because we've already talked about campaign strategy. We have peace with the Sturgeons. We're only at peace with two different kingdoms that are paying us, and Britannia, we've been neutral for a very long time. The Aserai, of course, recently rather, Guzid gave us peace and decided to finally give us some money, and we just squeezed money from the Sturgeons and this birth control haircut fucking dipshit. We bashed the shit out of the Sturgeons, and eventually they were willing to pony up a bunch of gold as well. Everybody else we're still either at war with, or Britannia we're at peace. Why is that important? Well, look where Tayal is, right? It's way up here. What's a threat to Tayal? Certainly not Sturgia, because we're at peace with them. The Western Empire, sort of, but this is a really long ways for them to go. And again, this gets back to campaign strategy. Referring to the garrisons quickly here, you will not want to have a massive amount of garrison of troops at your city. On one hand, that's everybody's initial reaction. You can see Makeb here is pretty well defended, right? 337 guys in the garrison. That is quite a large defense force. Now, we just went there. A lot of these troops are scrubby, but you can see you still have 11 legionnaires and 6 dark hands. This would be an incredible hard city for the enemy to take, right? It has positive food stock, so they can't starve it for a while. Level 3 walls, and almost 900 defenders between the garrison and the militia. Here's the catch. If you stock all of your garrisons like Makeb, you will start to lose money, right? And we will no longer have this expected change where it's this big green number. You just can't afford to have 400 or 500 troops at all the garrisons and expect to be positive outflows. Now, you do have control over this. I want to mention this part. There's all these convoluted pages. In the parties section, you can actually go down to the garrison of Tayal and say, No more recruiting, right? The cities pull troops each day, either from the local city or from the villages. You can tell them, I don't want you to do that. Most of the time you want this clicked. And most of the time you want this. It says party wage, but effectively what that should say is garrison wage. You want this most of the time on unlimited because you're going to want your cities to recruit troops. However, if you get to a stage of your campaign where you go down to your little finances here and this is highly negative, you're going to want to start stopping recruitment because you're basically getting flooded with troops. In our situation, if you look across our castles and cities, we've got a lot of understaffed locations. Now, the benefit of that is that makes us profitable, right? When you go back to the fief page and you go to Makeb, for example. Now, this one actually has a large garrison. Where's this shit? Garrison wages, 1455. So you can see the garrison there, and then you can see the expected change. Notables +1. That means one of the notables there is giving us a guy for the garrison. The garrison wages minus 1,500. And let's look at this at a little more granular level. This right side over here is all the money, and this is a critical component of it. So we're getting 2,400 from taxes, 90 from tariffs, right? Donald Trump and his tariffs, we're getting 90. Garrison is only 1,400, so it's not even as much as the taxes for the city. On top of that, the villages produce additional money, obviously, as long as they're not raided and destroyed. It's a small amount, but what is that? 500 or so, right? So it's significant. All told, even with this decent-sized garrison, we're still profitable in this city, right? Almost 1,500. In fact, our profit is almost twice the wages. It is actually twice the wages of our garrison. Part of the reason is that it's prosperous, but that's not going to last forever, right? I was already showing you with Tayal. As your prosperity goes down, your taxes will go down. You can basically think of it, if you have less citizens, you go to try to tax them, and guys have left, right? This minus 25. What I said earlier is I like to consider the population of 10x. This is a daily number. And if you do 10x for this, in other words, if there's 80,000 people living in Tayal, this means that 250 are leaving every day. And then you get a breakdown of it there if you're really curious why. And you will be curious why at times because you need to change whatever is causing these negative numbers here. In this case, minus 24 for the food shortage, right? The city is starving. And so naturally people are leaving. There's a decent realism element to Bannerlord in the cities. Whoever designed this city aspect side of Bannerlord is a pretty smart fella or fellas or ladies or whoever. They know what they're doing, or at least it's one of the more accurate designs in the game. Now, when you go to food, of course, you can break all this down. I'll spend 30 seconds on this because there are some important elements here for you to understand. It says inside production, the garrison eats some food. Prosperity, right? Prosperity, they eat 202 little food items or however you want to consider it, barrels of food. That's because there's a lot of people there. If you have a smaller prosperity, that number will be really small. And obviously, that's the equalizing factor in Bannerlord. If tons of people leave your city because they're starving, eventually there's enough food for everybody. And that's because you can see the food that's coming in. The 18 plus 18 plus 18 with these weird names, buckets. Those are the little villages that are part of this fief. I think the game refers to the term bound to the fief, right? Those little villages are effectively being overlorded by the governor of this city. Now you see those coming in plus 18, plus 18, plus 18. That number changes depending on the size of the villages. As they get destroyed by raids, they get small and have to sort of start over building their village up, right? You can sort of consider and picture all these peasants out in the field sifting through the rubble and starting to make more hovels. They can't provide as much food for the main city. All of the villages are pretty much on their own as far as production. You don't have any control. They just start to build up, and as they build up, that food starts to go to the city, and it's an important contribution, right? That's 54 food. I beg your pardon. That is 36 food, Visibrat and buckets, that is going to Tayal here. Most cities have 3 villages. A few have 4, and then a handful also have 2. So there's 36 food coming from these villages. The building bonuses, you get extra food from certain things in cities. And I will go, I'm currently right next to, we're right next to Danustica. We'll look at Danustica a little closer as well. Then you see the grain plus 56, grapes, beer, cheese, all that stuff. That comes from the actual inventory of the city. And it's a strange process, but effectively the market is where all the people get their food on a daily basis. When you go here to trade, if you have a bunch of food, you can actually just sell it to the city. And it really would be separate in most cities. But as you can see here at Danustica, there is enormous sums of food. Now, this is partly because I just did this. I will explain that in a little bit, but in a nutshell, I just took a lot of the food out of the stash and I dumped it on the city. And the reason I did that is because in this campaign, we are getting very close to a rampage on the Southern Empire. I'm going to commit to a large campaign in the Southern Empire. A campaign is just an extended period of war where you're leaving your homeland and invading somewhere and fucking people up, right? So we went to our stash here where we've been piling up food. And at this stage, we have an unbelievably beautiful food situation in the stash. The benefit of this is that the city can't touch this. This is the rich people hoarding all the grain in their city because the nobles never starve. The city can only eat out of the public trade markets. So the citizens here at Danustica, you can see plus 146. Suddenly they're all carb addicted. These guys are going and pounding a nice big old fish for dinner and then 4 loaves of bread. Every single guy is getting fat and happy. There's meat, there's cheese, there's beer. This being in the market here, and of course we can affect it, by the way. I'm not going to, but I can say, give me all your fucking shit, take it all. And then what happens, ironically, is the city people starve. They have very little reserves. That part's not perfectly realistic. Most people would have, a bunch of bread or some other capacity to obtain food. In Bannerlord, they don't really, right? These people effectively all just start to starve, and very quickly that number starts going down. And you're hearing me saying that number, what the fuck are you talking about? Let's look at this for 30 seconds. I've covered this before. Usually the maximum is 700 if you have a few companions that are governors with the right perks. I think it goes to 820. That's basically the total amount of food that's available for the city. Once it gets to a certain point, you get a food overage. And you can see, where is this? Expected change plus 146. You divide that number by 10, and that is how many people come there. In fact, since we're doing a 10-to-1 ratio, remember I told you I consider prosperity times 10, that's the population. There's 62,000 people living in Danustica right now, and the expected change is plus 15.5. And if you break it down, almost all of that is coming from surplus food. Does that make sense, fellas? Hopefully this all makes sense. I'm a pretty good explainer and articulator of complicated things, so I'm doing my best here to make a complicated system a lot easier to understand. Of course, a lot of you guys know this and you're already hitting the X button or you're fast forwarding. Understood. Completely understood. Now, again, you look here and there's some important considerations to make here. The first is that the city does not uptake all the different food and start eating it correctly. Like I said before, they're carb addicted, and why I made that joke is that say you put 5,600 grain, fish, meat, dates, and all butter and all this other shit. When you go to your main prosperity page here, or excuse me, to your food page, you see how it says plus 191 grain and plus 25 fish, plus 23 meat. Your numbers won't be identical, even though there's an identical units of the fields in the city. That's because in order of preference, your people will eat grain first, fish second, and meat third. And a more accurate way is the grain has a larger impact on that plus number than the fish and then the meat. I don't know the exact ratios, but you can see right now it says plus 25 fish and almost plus 200 grain. So you would assume that there's 8 times as much grain as there is in the city, right? Based on those numbers. However, when we go into the trade, we know that's not the case, right? In fact, the fish, there's almost half as much fish as the grain. You'd think it'd be plus 100. It's not. Same thing with the meat. You would think it would be really close to the fish, and it's not. The people just eat food. And actually, this situation, the meat is showing up higher. The bottom line you need to understand is the most important food for a city is grain. Just think of them as carb addicted. If you want to increase this food number, which both prevents your garrison from starving and also obviously eventually becomes a surplus, which attracts more people, you must have grain in that city. Right? Conversely, if you're trying to starve out an enemy, just take his cities or take their cities, sack them, and cause all kind of carnage, and then take and buy all the bread. For whatever reason, you can just completely strip the people from all their food. They have hardly any reserves, and within a week, that city will be in bad shape, starving, peasants rioting and shit, and very bad things will happen for their kingdom, right? That's essentially the opposite, of course, of what we're trying to achieve here with our fiefs. We're trying to make them growing, prosperous places. So going back to this again, We know this city's making a lot of money. In fact, we could grow the garrison considerably here before it started to lose money. We know we can go to the party section page of this city here. It doesn't matter too much. It was Makeb, and I like to keep these unlimited for a long time. You can see the garrison can be almost twice as large before it's full, right? So on your fief page, you're getting all this information. We'll cover a few more of these here, and then we will move on from cities. I've already covered this, and I don't think it's critical that you understand each part of this in exquisite detail. And there are guys like Strat who have definitely covered it more coherently and faster than I have here. So your food stocks, right, we're positive here in Makeb. Cities that are far away, the food becomes a problem. And the main reason for that is that you have no ability to send them grain, right? There's no metric or way in the game for me to send, a bunch of couriers and a bunch of wagons all the way up to Tyal and say, take all this food to Tyal because Tyal is starving. You have to physically visit that place, right? That's one of the difficulties of it. What does that mean? Strategy. That means that after I go somewhere and I'm going to leave our little campaign to Sturgia, you dump a bunch of food. If you can afford it, you try to dump some food and leave some food on the big cities like Tyal, right? That way that if they start getting raided and whatnot, they have a pretty decent chance of holding out their food supplies for a little bit longer. Right, so that's food. Tyal's having some problems here. The good news, like I said before, though, is it's unlikely to be sieged because there's no enemies nearby it. Loyalty. This is a critical thing to understand. In your city page, when you're doing projects, they won't build anything if your loyalty is 25 or below. You have a chance for rebellion, and your citizens are just like at strike, fucking with picket signs. Fuck you, Wazuban. We're not building today. You want this number as high as reasonable, but in many cases, it's going to be negative. You can see all the things that are affecting it. Of course, starving should be more than -1. It should be like -10. If people are starving, they're not going to be loyal to you. It's like beating your wife. You definitely can't expect to live a long life. She's probably going to shoot you to death or throw your penis out the window or something like that. So -3 for owner culture. Of course, these cities don't like being just like real life. They don't like fucking imperialists telling them what's up. Ask Napoleon and his marshals how it went in Spain in 1809, right? They fucking riot. They stab and kill people. They try to murder all your troops. Loyalty and other cities is a problem, right? Now, to counter that, we have policies. And I will get into policies. It'll probably be 5 or 10 minutes from now. But policies is one of the more interesting parts of Bannerlord because not only is it somewhat realistic, but you have all these different choices and there's strategy to this, right? There's an awful lot of strategy to that. And I will get into that briefly. Just want to wrap up the city part here. If your security is low, your loyalty will have a problem. And you can basically think of it like crime. If you have a really low number for security, you've got tons and tons and tons of crime, right? When I go down to Danustica here, of course, Danustica is being run exceptionally well, if I do say so myself, right? The proverbial pat on the back here. We've basically wrapped up crime. In fact, you can see that things are heading towards 100. Incidentally, I'll cover this really quick. You see this security drift? There's a drift to a number of these things. And this is effectively the system trying to pull it to 50. You can think of when things are really bad, when crime and loyalty is really low, it drifts naturally back to 50. And the security thing, same thing, right? The higher the number is, the bigger that drift will be, trying to pull it back to 50. And it's an equalizing tendency, right? The game wants to prevent mass riots, but it also wants to prevent the game from being too easy. That's what the drift is all about, right? So the higher you are, when you get close to 100, you can see the loyalty drift basically reaches 5, and it's minus. However, you can see all the different things that we're doing to overcome that. Even though we have a huge loyalty drift, a drift down, we're still only losing 1 a day, right? Because we have all these tribunes of the people. That's a policy. Forgiveness of debt +2. That's another policy. Then fairgrounds. That's building security +9. That's because our cops are out there walking the street and making sure people aren't getting robbed. And then there's a notable there, evidently, that's writing nice pamphlets about us. Okay, so hopefully those two are understandable. The biggest thing you need to understand is you want these high, and if it gets to a low point, 25 is a good number, you've got major problems. Your construction's going to stop, the chances of rebellion shoot up, your prosperity is going to crater, you're going to have all kinds of problems. Militia, you can think of the retired component of militia as the same thing as drift. That number goes up the more militia you have. Basically, it's an equalizing system so that you don't get 80,000 militia in a city and every city would be untakeable. So we're having a bunch of guys retire, but we're getting a bunch from building, I think, or maybe that's an active one of the passive things that we're doing there. And then you get some from prosperity. Basically, there's lots of people. You get lots of guys that are ready to volunteer to war, right? Militia grounds is another building, I think, that we're getting benefit from. The net effect though is -5. So we're losing militia pretty quickly in Danustica. Part of the reason this is occurring is that I just took the governor from Danustica. We had Corain here, right? This is Caladog's daughter, and there's no way to do it fast. I think I would have to go here. We will just do this. So you can see Corain. If I assign her to be the governor, there's this big long list of perks that she brings, including a lot that say +1 militia recruitment in the governed settlement, right? That means that the longer she stays there, the bigger the militia is going to get. However, as soon as she leaves and she's going to join us on this campaign, right now we have no governor in Danustica. When that occurs, obviously you're going to start to drift down in militia. This will equalize eventually, and we'll probably have 500 or 600 militia still in Danustica. The garrison wages, right? You can see again, this city is enormously profitable. We're only paying 1,000. Just the taxes alone is 3 times that. The tariffs, the city, the villages. I mean, we are just mopping it up financially here. And part of the reason is we have a tiny little garrison. Incidentally, you can always do this in mid-battle or whatever it is. It's not the most incredibly accurate system. In fact, this is quite unrealistic. You can just go to your party screen here and say, okay. And you could be hundreds of miles away and do this and be like, all right, Danustica, let's see. They're being sieged, and it'll literally tell you down to the number of what troops are there, right? We left a small garrison in the city, but good troops, right? There's some Jawal, there's some wildlings. There's some of the units I'm trying to stack up here, sort of store them for the long term. All right. So that's the cities here, kind of in a nutshell. These notables, these guys are the villagers where you do quests, and the next thing you know, these guys are fucking writing good pamphlets about you, or hopefully you understand what I mean by that. These are the bound villages, and again, it shows you, in fact, you can actually get the small details, the micro detail about these places, right? The hearths is like the population for the villages, and then militia, that goes up the more people that are there, right? If you have a huge village, and villages can get huge, they can get to like 1,500, 1,800. Suddenly you have a militia of like 200 units, and it's very difficult for the enemy to raid them, which is a cool feature. It'd be nice actually if you could upgrade villages and put like a tower or some kind of wall around them or something like that, but I digress. All right, so that's the city page comprehensively. Hopefully that covers most or all questions that you fellas have on that. The reason that's important is that it relates to money, right? Money is the most important thing in warfare, and obviously our situation is good. You can break all this down, right? Tribute income, that's those bitch-ass other kingdoms paying us money because we beat the shit out of them, and like a bully in a schoolyard, we demanded money or else the beatings would continue. Caravan and party issues. We have very few caravans. Actually, I don't think we have a single caravan, at least none that are being operated by companions. A lot of that income there, that 3,371, that's coming from our companions that have extra cash, and they give it back to you almost like an allowance. It's a strange process. You can see our workshops are modestly profitable. I don't pay much attention to workshops. In fact, we got a couple here that are basically not running well. And the reason for this is simple. You see all of this income, it's an extra 1,000. Well, whoop-de-fucking do, right? We're making 42,000 from our settlements. This would just be, it just doesn't make a difference in the scheme of things. Early on in a campaign, your workshop income can become important, but workshop income really is kind of a nothing in Bannerlord, unless you're really dedicated to it, right? At this stage, we're making so much money, never mind the fact that we're winning a huge battle every other day and buying or selling loot, so that every city we go to, we take all of the gold that's there. Money really is no option at this stage. Tribute payment to mercenaries, that's for the 2 or 3 mercenary clans that we have. And then recruitment expense, that just shows the day-to-day one. Incidentally, This is probably, I don't know exactly. I'm looking down at the date. I think this is 4, 5, 6 days after where I'm going to break off the other recording because some unexciting stuff happened. I visited a bunch of villages, a couple cities. We picked up a bunch of troops. And what I've done is I've called most or all the nobles to us. I stocked them up on a lot of troops. We largely emptied the garrison out here at Danustica, loaded everybody up, and now we're going to commit to a campaign, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. Campaign strategy, right? And your companions. Whoops, we're getting a little auto-save in here, and that tells me that I'm jumping around subjects too long and rambling a little bit too long to make this a quick, coherent episode. So campaign strategy is important, right? You have your own army, of course. I have my army right now, and it's quite vast. But you notice, well, I better explain. There's 2,000 guys in this army, and it's not actually 2,000 right now. This shows you the maximum. Those guys are not here yet. In fact, when I step over here, you can see the number 1258, and then you can see these other armies running around. What's going on here is that I've called other parties that are a ways away, and they haven't arrived yet, right? These guys 4 days away, this guy is. And I should explain this. This is a new clan that we just recruited, or more accurately, we stole them from the Aserai. The Lake Rats. This Nevig guy actually was in Danustica when I came here. He's just hanging out at the tavern. I dropped a big bag of gold in front of him and said, hey, why don't you join our side? We actually have a kingdom. Those stupid ass Aserai have one city and one castle? They have one city and one castle. And Nevig, this guy's astute. He understands that his former kingdom, the Aserai, are going to be bereft of gold. And so he's joining our side here, the winning side. This guy's got lake rats. He's got good-looking troops. And I've called a couple of his other troops to me because what I was planning on doing with them is giving them some of our troops. However, at this stage, I don't really want to give them any more troops. What I'm doing, though, is I'm calling them here, and I'm leaving some of these troops out of our main army, right? When I go to this screen here, if I click, what button I click? Usually it's nearby. It'll show you the ones that you don't have. There's no green check there. That means these guys are recruitable for the army because they're not in our army. This is intentional. What I'm hoping is that one of our clans, we've got 2 other clans that can recruit, the Black Prince and the Golden Horde. I'm hoping that these guys will make armies. Now, you guys have seen me do this before where I pump up the units that are in their armies. In fact, a couple of these armies that you see running around here, I gave them some troops. And the reason I did that is that I want their armies to be stronger, right? If you just let the AI do its thing with its natural armies, they will have a lot of ghetto troops in their armies. In fact, let's see if we can zoom in on one of these guys. Urgil, this guy. Oh, he's got quite a few of the lake rats, but you also see he's got sturgeon warriors and trucks and fucking whatnot. A lot of times the armies will be worse than this, in fact. They will have a whole bunch of recruits. And if you're wondering why your companion armies get slain all the time, that's why, right? You don't have to, but one of the best ways to make sure that they have success is to give them troops, right? I can go into these guys. Actually, none of them are close enough for me to go into. I can just give you an example. You just go in here and you say donate, and you dump a bunch of troops onto those companion clans. Now, they're loose. They're actually loose out there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disband another one or two. I'm hoping, and it might not happen, but what I'm hoping what happens is that one of these guys forms an army. They're loose out here. There they go. Okay, so this guy just formed an army. Matunis, this guy's from one of the player clans. Let's see how big his army is. 952. So it's not a huge army, and this is intentional, fellas. Instead of having them have a gigantic army, what I'm hoping is that they have 2 armies. And that's because we're going to engage on a Southern Empire trek here, a smashing of the Southern Empire. And what I'm hoping is that these 2 separate armies, these 2 smaller, more mobile armies, will defend. Right? You don't have a lot of control over them, but I'm hoping if they're smaller and I have this war strategy thing here on defensive, that these armies will be more willing to defend instead of going to siege Physion or something like that, for example. Incidentally, if there's a city that's under siege, they will almost certainly be defensive instead of going to siege, but not always. Sometimes they will decide it's a good idea to attack, even though clearly almost anybody with the brain would say, well, let's go defend first and then we'll attack, right? They will sometimes siege anyways. Now, if I want another army made, let's see if he used all the armies here. I bet he did. When I go into here and I go distance, let's see, distance, So there's one guy that they didn't recruit for that army. What I'm going to do now is actually encourage a second army. Let's see who we got here. Someone's got to make the army. Your minor clans will not make armies. And that's an important distinction. And I don't think he can make an army either. I don't think, is Rahan or whatever the guy, I think he's already in it. This is an important point. Well, Radan, this guy right here. This guy can make an army. He's in the Black Prince. The other guy's in the Golden Horde. These two different player clans we have. Our other armies now will not make an army. I think if I disband these guys will simply roam the map because they don't have someone who can make an army. He can't, she can't. Right. So unfortunately, even though I want two armies to be made, there's only two companion army clans out there. And they're not going to form another army. That said, if these armies are loose like that, the ones that just disbanded, they will try to defend. They will help villages that are being raided. If there's a city under siege and they can interfere and have some success, they will try to do so, right? So that's a function and a benefit of us doing that there. All right, let's see what else. Covered cities, clans, armies. Clans, you really do want to pump these guys up. Now, I can't give them money. Because you got to give it directly to the clan leader. But I can come in here, and I've talked about this before, and just give him more influence. It's not a one-for-one exchange, and it costs you your influence, right? So that's an important consideration. This is actually the lowest number we've had for a while, so I've got to keep an eye on that. Of course, you gain influence from a variety of different factors. You go here, and it basically shows you, right? We're getting a bunch from buildings. King, we're getting some points for being the king. I guess you call us a king. And then clan members in an army are also giving us some influence. Basically, just like the rest of it, it shows you kind of your expected daily change. We're making 20 influence a day. And then, of course, we have to pay for this army. We're slowly hemorrhaging influence. The biggest way to gain influence is to win battles, and that's what we plan on doing. All right. Next on this, let's talk about policies, right? Policies is an important part of Bannerlord. And I'm probably going to spend 5 minutes on this. So again, if this part bores you, it's an important part of the game. I do want to cover this, right? So we will talk about these. Now, there's active policies and there's other policies. I don't know why they call it other. They should just call it disactive or deactivated or not active. Maybe that's why they say other policies. These policies are policies that you can enact. And for people who don't know quite what that means, it basically means are these policies active? In other words, are they currently running? The ones that are up here are running, and the ones that are down here are not. Now, what you can do is you can go in here and propose these policies, and I have a small list of policies that I want for us. In fact, let's just go right into that. If you look at these, almost all of these have a plus and a minus. In other words, the pros and cons of doing these things. And it's kind of cool. Like it sort of gives like an explanation of what it means. A Senate is basically a quasi-democracy, right? Everybody gathers up around a big table and decides, hey, we don't want to go to the war with the Southern Empire. And you're like, shut the fuck up. I'm in charge. You're stupid. The bottom line, though, is that almost all of these policies, when you go to these, there's a reason to do it and then a reason not to. In other words, there's a pros and cons for each one. So this one, a good example, Senate, tier 3 clans gain 0.5 influence per day. Influence cost of inviting lower tier clans to an army are increased by 10%, right? So when I invite these armies to my army, it costs me 10% more to invite them. However, the clans that I want to give influence to, these two clans, they are lower tier. And if you look at that policy, what that's going to do to them, plus 3 clans gain 0.5 influence per day. This is a perk that we don't want to activate until these clans are tier 3. See how they're clan tier 2? When these guys hit clan tier 3, we will activate this policy. And what will happen is every day, these guys will get 0.5. I don't know if you can see... I don't think you can see their expected change, but basically the same way that you have an expected change of influence, right? When I go down here again, it says plus 20. These guys have that. It just, I don't know if you can see it. It might be something, maybe I'm just not aware of where you see it if it is. The bottom line is their influence goes up and down, and things like the policy can affect it. So this is an example of something I'm going to do eventually. I'm just not going to do it right yet. Some of these, it's very easy to make the decision. Here you go. The cost of revoking a fief from a clan is doubled. Clans gain point influence for each fief they own. And this includes them, of course. Well, of course I want to do this, right? I'm not going to be revoking a fief from them very often. It says support for enacting because sometimes they'll vote against you. Everybody likes this policy, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, it costs you, I think, 100 per policy. So that's an important consideration. These are not free. There's no free lunch in life, and that's the case with these. Now, I'm not going to cover every single one of these. However, I want to talk about the assets and the strategy side of Bannerlord, because this is an important part to any strategy game. In a situation like this, you need to figure out what your assets are and what your liabilities are. What I mean by that essentially is, what do we have a lot of and what do we want more of? Well, right now we have lots and lots of money. We know this, right? We have tons of money. We have tons and tons of equipment. When I go into equipment, every single lord is maxed out with this armor and that armor, right? Just fucking wearing beautiful armor. We have lots and lots of influence, right? I have 2,700 influence. I have a lot of flexibility there. When you first start your kingdom, you won't have that much kind of influence. We have lots of fiefs, right? When I look at my map here, this is a lot of castles and cities and towns and stuff like that. This is a lot of fiefs, and with that comes more money, comes more influence. We have a lot of prosperity. Most of our cities, when you go and look at the prosperity, it's doing really well, right? And that's partly because we've defended it correctly. And the cities that are further away from the fronts of war, they're not getting attacked, right? That's part of the reason I put clan cities and castles farther away from the front so that they're unlikely to be sieged by the enemy. You can see this little city here that's owned by the Golden Horde. Their prosperity is slowly going up. Their security is going up. Their loyalty is actually great. Their food stocks are a little worrying. Basically, there's too many people there. We need to dump some food on them. But everything about that clan city looks really good. And this is important because this is one of the places that your clan leaders get their troops from, right? They're going to have mediocre to small armies if they don't have cities with garrisons. They're not going to make any money. They're going to have a bunch of different problems, right? So these are the positive assets we have. We have lots of money, lots of influence, lots of equipment. Now, what do we need, right? What do we really want in our kingdom? Well, I need more troops, right? Obviously. We have all these cities and castles to defend, and we have plenty of money. We want to be recruiting as fast as we can. Every single time there are mercenaries for sale, we'll buy them all. Every village, if they have 50 troops available, I'll buy them all until our garrisons start to look nice and fat, right? Until we get to the point where when I go into some random city here, like this one, there's 200 garrison. Actually, that's a decent sized garrison. Some of these garrisons are small. I've seen like 100 and something. They're slowly building up, but I'd like to have at least 200 garrison at all of these cities, right? A couple of those were right on the edge. We're actually doing decent in the garrison side of things. What they don't have is they don't have strong troops, right? When I look at the troops in a lot of these places, Vigla recruit, Imperial recruit, Equite, etc., they don't have great troops. So we need to continue to acquire more troops. We need to continue to acquire more lords, hence the acquisition of the lake rats, right? We can clearly afford to pay these guys. And the last thing I'm going to do eventually, not this episode, is we're going to add another player clan. I have decided to max out at 3 player clans. You can keep on making them, but it gets kind of convoluted, and it's important for them to have fiefs. It shows you right here, this one has 3, this one has 2. If you have 12 player clans, obviously you can't give them all fiefs, and that becomes a real problem. All right, so I have the assets. In other words, what kind of resources do I have? What kind of leverage? What kind of what do I have at my disposal? And what am I looking for? I'm looking for more lords, more troops, more militia. So when we go to the policy stage, those facts dictate our decision, right? When I go down here, and I've got a list that I did beforehand here, so I don't have to drag you through all of them. Feudal something or other. Where's this shit? Oh, I already clicked it. I must have done this before the episode. Oh, no, wait. This is the one I just did, right? So the cost of revoking a fief from a clan is doubled. That means if I take a fief from one of these clan leaders, it costs me a bunch of influence to do it. Well, we're not going to do that, but we do like this, right? They get 0.1 influence for each fief they own. Well, one of them had 3, the other one had 2. This is plus influence every single day for those clans on a passive level. This is a no-brainer policy. Let's go through just a few more of these. Marshals. This is one I'll do later. Armies led by tier 5 nobles require 10% less influence. Right, that's great. That means that they can be gathered up for less influence. And then influence of the ruler clan is reduced by 1 per day. That's okay, right? It's basically a trade. I'm getting plenty of influence. I can afford -1 per day. In fact, you see the feudal inheritance? It's a good point. That one policy is giving us plus 7.6. We just activated this, and it added almost 40% to our expected daily change of influence. That is just an enormous change. I didn't anticipate showing you this for this episode, but it's a good example of how critical it is to add this. Now, it doesn't really make sense. It says point influence for each fief they own. Maybe they're considering the towns, because certainly we don't own 76 fiefs. I think they're including the little towns here. That's why it's 0.176 would be the total number of fiefs. Anyways, you get the idea. That policy is manifestly powerful for us here. Another one that I flagged is cantons. Daily militia production is increased by 1. We are going to war, and militia help defend your cities against war. Recruits replenish 20% faster. That's terrific, right? That's a great trait. You go to a city. How many times do we see this, right? There's no fucking people here. Nobody ready to go to war. That's a buzzkill. With that policy, those guys are going to spring back and what's the word you guys use? Spawn. Those guys are going to be available quicker, right? Under the cantons. Then tax income and settlements are reduced by 10%. I already said that's one of our assets. I don't give a shit about gold, right? This is an automatic policy. We're enacting this shit. Let's get some militia. Let's get some recruits replenishing faster. And I think this affects all of your cities, right? So that's lots more troops. What I'm doing here, fellas, basically, again, I have a list of assets, things I have a lot of, and I have a list of goals, things I want more of. It's almost like we're trading baseball cards. And I'm trading money for militia. I'm trading money for troops because I want more of those latter two things, right? So I'll just cover a couple more of these before we move on. Let's see, I've got... this one says royal privilege. I think this is another one that's sort of marginal. For kingdom decisions, the influence cost of the ruling... actually, this one is strange. There are a few of these, and I'm puzzled. But basically, there's no reason not to do this. You see, there's no cost for kingdom decisions. If I want to overrule somebody, which I have to do all the time because these dipshit clans will ask for peace, I don't have to... There's no negative here. I can just use less influence to reduce... I use less influence to say, shut the fuck up. And there's no negative here. Right? So this is just an automatic policy. Now, it's strange that they would agree. They're like, sure, we want to make it easier for you to overrule us. We like that, right? And they actually spent influence like total dipshits. Talking about voting against your interests there. That's pretty bad. Now, there's one or two more here that I want to do just because they looked really tasty. Council of the Commons. Each notable gains point. This here, you can kind of role play and read this shit out. I don't give a fuck. It's kind of fun enrichment, but I'm concerned about the accurate effects, the real effects. Each notable yields 0.1 influence per day to the settlement owner's clan. That means all the little, your people that live in the city that are influencers, right? They got a YouTube channel like me. They're giving you 0.1 influence per day passively, and all it does is cost you a little bit of money. We already said we've got all the money in the world. Absolutely. These guys, this stupid dipshit opposed me. Not sure about Jaim the Prince constantly voting for peace. Now he's voting against me. A little role playing here. We might have to fucking give him the glare from Wazu the next time we're in town. That again is a no-brainer, and I bet, holy shit. Look at that. That is incredible. And I didn't even realize some of the effects of these are going to be this pronounced. You see that bottom thing there? Council of the Commons, plus 21. That was more than all of the influence we were getting before this episode started from that one policy. We lose a little bit of money. And again, who gives a shit? Now we're down to 11,000 gold. Our settlement income's going down. Well, we're only pulling in 11,000. We're just raking it in. But now our influence is rocketing. And influence is more important for us at this stage because we have to form these armies, right? So there's another really powerful, obvious perk. Then I'm going to do this last one here and we'll wrap this side up. Bailiffs. Town security is increased by 1 per day. This is important. Basically, there's a bunch of fucking sheriffs walking around handcuffing medieval fucking criminals. Towns, this is a really important part. Towns with a security greater than 60 yield 1 additional influence to the owner clan. And then taxes go down again. So we don't care. We're already rolling in the dough. And by the way, these are all reversible. So early on, like, you could just rack up a bunch of gold, and then later you can just vote these. You can vote to abolish these policies and just basically sort of custom dial in for whatever needs you have. Now, I want to show you this real quick. Let's go to the clans, fiefs, and then we will look here at security. What it said is you get +1 if the city security is over 60. Well, I just noticed a few of these. We got some fucking criminal motherfuckers. So some security issues going on in a few of our cities, right? They're going to vote. They're going to vote for Donald Trump because they want some walls built or whatever the fuck. But the loyalty here, the security above 60 gives us that bonus as part of that perk. And you can see a lot of our cities have a security above 60. So again, when I go back to the policy page there, that one was bailiffs. Again, we go down to bailiffs. As soon as I enact this policy, we're going to lose money, but we're also going to get security, which is good, right? That a lot of those cities need the security. And incidentally, once it hits 60, so this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not only do you get this influence once you get to a certain level of security, but as soon as I click this, we're more likely to get to 60 security, or 60 security. So this is another tremendously valuable perk. You can see none of my nobles have any objections to it. So we'll go ahead and vote for that. And we've used some influence for all these different things that we just enacted, all these different policies. But look at that shit. I'm going to wrap up this episode with this point, or at least this portion of the episode. I'm going to take a little break here. +55 to our influence. I'm sure we were at +20 when this episode started. We have almost tripled our daily influence that's coming in from these policies. Now, I know some guys will be like, well, just spec your character out with charm, and one of these things you get a bunch of influence or whatever, right? +5 influence a day. Is that really what these guys are that excited about? +5 influence? Why? I'm getting +55. Who gives a shit, right? So this is one of the misnomers, I think. I mean, there are other advantages in charm here. You get some other perks, of course. +5 influence. I don't give a shit about that. Now we're printing influence. And by the way, I have a mass murdering, army wrecking, siege dominant juggernaut, the mountain looking motherfucker here, cutting guys into pieces with his two hand. He moves around the battlefield like an NFL lineman. This guy's a beast. He has an incredible army. Oh no, I'm not getting +5 influence a day. Again, I don't know this game inside out. There's guys like Strat Gaming Guides who have done incredible deep meta studies of this game, but I'm telling you, I don't think charm is that necessary in Bannerlord, right? There are advantages, and it all depends on your playing style. My preference in playing style is to wreck shop on the battlefield and have my army truck everything in sight, and then just run the correct policies, right? You can see from this the changes we made that were fairly simplistic. All it did is cost us some money. We're still positive. We're still making piles of gold every day. And yet we have this, whoops, that's his hit points. We have this enormously now influence positive kingdom. And incidentally, our clans, in fact, I think I'll try to remember this or write this down even. 730. I had 730 on the Black Prince today and 538. And we'll see where they are in 6 months or a year, right? We'll see how much their clan's influence goes up from those policies, because they do. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these. This episode has already far exceeded what I was expecting to do to this stage. Just understand, though, that these perks are tremendously powerful. And some of these we'll do later, like this. When they hit Clan Tier 3, we'll do this one, right? And again, it costs us, it costs more money to recruit lower tier clans. There won't be any lower tier clans. These guys are going to be higher clans getting influence per day. Anyways, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this section on strategy. You know what? Let's spend 2 minutes on campaign strategy. Go ahead and sit up in my chair again. I got a terrible tendency of slouching when I'm fucking discussing all this stuff. So I got our map here, right? We've got our whole kingdom. Strategically, we're not at war with Sturgia. Don't care about the North. If they declare war on us, we will just body slam them. We will make an example out of their asses and drive in more on their territory. For now, we're going to ignore the North. The Western Empire is clearly a threat. We will be attacking them at times, but I'm choosing right now, at the beginning of this onset of this episode, to play defense. Now, if all of a sudden, like 4 cities light up and our companion army here, this little guy with his army, they get slain in the field, I may change my strategy. But right now, my strategy is to take a very large army and start wrecking shop on the Southern Empire. to that effect, I have put a bunch of lower level troops in our army, right? We have, those are prisoners. We have 35 Imperial recruits and Aserai archers and some lower level troops. Those guys are to fill garrisons. In fact, if you look at some of our companions, the same thing should be present, right? She's got a bunch of recruits and low level troops. We stripped the garrison here at Danustica, hoping that the militia can hold the fort while we head south, devastating Southern Empire armies and taking their cities, and then we will stock those garrisons with troops that we're bringing on this campaign. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break here, make sure that all this is coherent, do a little fancy editing, and we will be right back. But hopefully you enjoyed this little deep dive. It's more than a little. It's this deep dive into campaign strategy, city management, clan management, etc. I love talking about this stuff. I'm certainly not, I don't know everything. Nobody does. But hopefully that was beneficial for you fellas.